Most people are not living their own lives. They are performing inside a gilded cage called social acceptance. They wake up trying to fit into the expectations of others, saying the things they are supposed to say, doing the things they are supposed to do. Day by day, they trade their inner freedom for outer stability. They call it growing up. But in truth, it is a clever form of self-imprisonment built on applause. Validation is a subtle addiction. It does not begin with loud cheers. It begins with a glance of approval, a moment of agreement, a simple sentence like, "You did great." And then you want that feeling to come back. You start repeating the behavior that pleased others, even if deep down you are not sure it truly reflects who you are. At first, you call it effort. Then it becomes duty. Then it becomes a role. And in the end, you lose the most authentic part of yourself just to keep the applause of people who are not living your life. The world claps for what it can understand. But your true self is not always easy to understand. And when you begin to change, not to meet others' expectations, but to follow your own conscience, the applause stops. That is when you realize that validation once gave you confidence, but it never gave you freedom. It is like a gilded cage, beautiful, but still a cage. And the danger is this: the cage does not come from enemies. It comes from the people you love the most. Family, friends, coworkers, your community, they are not trying to imprison you, but they have grown used to the predictable version of you. When you start to change, they call it distant, cold, or different. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are finally living truthfully. And that, no matter how gently done, makes others feel unsafe because it forces them to face a question. Are they living truthfully themselves? So many people go back to the old cage. They choose to be accepted instead of being free. They choose applause over inner peace. But you cannot live a full life if you constantly have to ask permission to be yourself. You cannot heal if your wounds must always be presented in a way that makes others comfortable. You cannot grow if every step is bound by outside approval. Validation is not wrong, but it should be a byproduct, not the goal. If you do what is right, live with kindness, stay disciplined, and quietly improve yourself every day, validation, if it comes, will arrive naturally. But if you place it at the center, you will start shaping everything around, keeping it, and that is when you lose the truth of who you are. You do not need a cage, even if it is gilded. You need a spine of steel, a quiet strength within that does not waver in the face of applause or silence. A set of values you can speak of with pride, not because others agree, but because you know you have not betrayed yourself. People often ask, if no one saw you working, would you still do it? The answer will reveal what you live for, applause or values. And if you are brave enough to choose the latter, be prepared. At first, they will not understand. But soon, they will not be able to ignore you, not because you spoke louder, but because your results will demand their attention. When you start rejecting expectations that no longer fit, people will say, you are not the same. When you choose silence instead of arguing, they say you are distant. When you stop reacting according to old patterns, you will be labeled cold or arrogant. But the truth is, you are not cold. You are simply returning inward. You are not arrogant. You are learning to be selective. You are not changing to rebel. You are changing because you can no longer trade your inner peace for the sake of surface-level connections. There is a big difference between withdrawing out of pain and turning inward out of maturity. One reacts from being hurt. The other acts from having learned to heal. And to do that, you need a new kind of discipline, emotional discipline. No more jumping into every argument. No more rushing to explain everything you do. No more forcing yourself to maintain relationships that only exist when you sacrifice yourself. Instead, you start asking, do I truly need this? Or am I just trying to be accepted? Returning inward is not about shrinking. It is the most powerful act you can do to restore energy, reconnect with your true values, and reset the boundaries that were blurred by the need to be liked. You learn to respect your own feelings, before trying to make others comfortable. You learn to sit in silence without shame. You learn not to answer what is unworthy of response. And then something strange happens. Instead of holding tight to relationships, you let them choose to stay or go, and you remain at peace with either outcome. Choosing stillness in a noisy world is an act of deep self-respect. No need for affirmation, no need for explanation, no need for theatrics, just you in clarity, consistency, and wholeness. That is not loneliness. It is focus. It is space for strength to regenerate. It is the foundation for lasting transformation from within. Others may not understand you, but the truth is, they do not need to. They only need to see the results. And the results will come when you choose to protect that stillness as if it were gold. We have lived too long being pulled into reaction instead of consciously creating a response. And intentional response only begins when you learn to step back, when you stop snapping back at every comment, when you understand that not every word deserves a reply, not every feeling deserves your attachment, and not everyone is close enough to deserve the energy of your explanation. Silence does not mean you have nothing to say. It means you know what is truly worth saying. I want to ask you something. Are you living in reaction or with intentional response? Share your thoughts in the comments, because who knows, one honest answer from you might awaken someone out there who needs to hear this. And if this part made you pause and reflect, hit like and subscribe. Those who are learning to turn inward should not walk that path alone. There is something few people teach you. Real change does not come from grand moments. It comes from early mornings when no one is watching, from quiet nights with no praise, from the times you do what needs to be done, even when no one is clapping. People love to talk about inspiration, but inspiration is a guest. It shows up when it wants. Discipline is different. Discipline is the one friend who stays when everyone else is gone. It does not ask if you feel like it. It only reminds you, we made a promise. Discipline is not glamorous. It does not attract attention. It does not wear the colors of motivation, but it is this quiet presence that creates irreversible change. Without discipline, you will always be dragged by emotion. And emotions are not loyal. Today you feel strong. Tomorrow you are tired, confused, or procrastinating. If you live only by how you feel, you will start, then quit, then start again, but never go far enough to create anything meaningful. I used to think that passion was enough. But the truth is, passion cannot replace habit. There are days when I do not want to write, do not want to listen, do not want to respond with intention, do not want to do what is right. But then I do it anyway. Not because I feel excited, but because I have chosen to become someone who does not depend on feeling excited. That is when I understood. Discipline does not take away your freedom. It is the only thing that protects it. We live in a world that glorifies speed and results, but the things that truly matter are built with time and repetition. No one sees the times you resist temptation to stay focused. No one praises you for turning off notifications and working deeply for 2 hours. No one knows how many times you almost gave up but still kept going. But it is these invisible actions that build a person who cannot be shaken. Discipline does not demand perfection. It only asks that you show up. Repeat. No excuses. You can begin tired, full of mistakes, lacking motivation, and still begin, because you understand that imperfect action is better than perfect ideas that never leave your head. And day after day, you begin to witness something no one talks about. Discipline has memory. It remembers every time you did not betray yourself. It silently builds self-respect inside you, until one day you no longer need motivation to do the right thing. It has become part of who you are. People often ask, how do I stay disciplined? The answer is not in your feelings. It is in your identity. If you still see yourself as someone who always gives up, someone who always procrastinates, then you will act that way. But if you start saying to yourself, I am someone who keeps promises to myself even when no one is watching, then every small action you take will begin to match that new identity. Discipline will not make you stand out overnight, but it will make you irreplaceable over time. It will not bring quick results, but it will create results no one can take away. Because what you are building is not fleeting success. You are building a person you yourself will have to respect. The world today does not lack information, but it seriously lacks focus. You can look up anything in 5 seconds, but you cannot hold your attention for more than 5 minutes. You may know a lot, but you do not create anything with depth, because the ability to sit still, to face yourself, and to choose one task, one direction, one goal at a time has become rare. Focus is no longer just a skill, it is a superpower. A person who can control their attention is a person who can control their life. On the other hand, someone who lets everything pull their attention, messages, notifications, news, fleeting emotions, will always live in reactive mode, never truly in control. And the scariest part is this: you do not need to do anything wrong to lose your life. You just need to stay distracted for long enough. I am not talking about how many things you can do. I am asking whether you can commit to something that actually matters. You may be very busy, but if your energy is scattered into dozens of little fragments, you will not create anything with weight. You do not need to do more. You need to do less, but go deeper. Focus is an intentional choice to choose one thing and accept missing out on everything else. It is an act of courage in a world that pushes you to know everything, try everything, do everything all at once. Focus is not flashy, but it produces something no one can replicate: personal identity and inner depth. That is why people who are truly excellent in one field do not show up everywhere, do not talk all the time, do not react to everything. They stay quiet, consistent, and pour all their energy into the one thing they have chosen to pursue, not because they are more talented, but because they are more committed. They are willing to reject what is easy to like in order to pursue what truly helps them grow. And most importantly, focus is a shield that protects the most valuable thing you have, your mental energy. You cannot afford to let it leak every day through meaningless conversations, anxiety-inducing content, or toxic comparisons you silently allow into your mind. Distraction today is not caused by lack of control. It is caused by lack of discernment. Every time you do not decide what to focus on, someone else will decide for you through a video, a post, a comment, or an unhealthy relationship. And they are not doing it because they care. They are doing it because you did not protect yourself. So focus is not just about productivity. It is a declaration that you respect your time, your mind, your dreams, and your limits. It is a daily choice, repeated again and again, not opening that app, not replying to that message, not dragging out that conversation, not consuming content that drains you, not because you are arrogant, but because you have a mission. Focus creates depth. Depth creates weight. And weight is what makes a person irreplaceable. Not because they do everything, but because they choose to do one thing all the way through. Pain is part of life. No one escapes it. But not everyone knows how to use it. Most people react on instinct. They get angry, push back, run away, or go silent in defeat. Pain shows up, and they let it take control. They say things they do not mean. They do things they later apologize for. And then a cycle begins. Hurt, react, regret, then hurt again. But pain is not the enemy. The way we handle it determines where we go. I used to let pain control me, especially in communication. There were times when even a light insult triggered an overreaction. Not because the words were that harsh, but because something inside me had not been healed. That anger was not the answer. It was a cry from a part of me I had ignored. Instinctive reactions are always fast, intense, and inaccurate. They are the product of pain that has not been understood. But here's the strange part. If you pause, even for one breath, and ask yourself, what am I really reacting to? These words or an old unnamed feeling? Then pain becomes a message. And When pain becomes a message, you stop reacting, you begin to respond. A response is intentional. It comes from awareness, not from trauma. A response is not weakness. In fact, it requires enormous inner discipline to not raise your voice when provoked, to not throw back negative energy when insulted, to not drag the conversation down by trying to win. No one teaches us how to do that. But I learned through mistakes, and the biggest lesson was this. Every time you react on instinct, you give someone else control over your emotions. They say something, you get angry. They do something, you feel hurt. They leave, and you lose your worth. That makes you a product of the environment instead of the one who navigates it. Emotional self-control is not about suppressing emotions. It is about knowing where they come from and choosing how to transform them. You do not deny your anger. You learn not to let it decide for you. You do not pretend you are not sad. You learn to let sadness pass without destroying what you are building. You do not ignore the pain, but you do not let it define who you are. When you master your response, you take back your power. And that power is not about making others fear you. It is about no longer fearing yourself. Unprocessed pain always returns, and next time, it comes back stronger. But if you dare to sit with it, listen to it, look it in the eye, you will begin to see that within every pain lies a demand for growth. Do not let it become a quick reaction. Let it become fuel for personal evolution. When you learn to turn pain into fuel, you stop reacting the way you used to. And the world will be surprised by one thing. You are no longer someone they can control with a single sentence. You are the one who stays silent, steady, and knows exactly what you are doing, even in the storm. Silence has never been the problem. The problem is that people are used to seeing silence as a sign of failure, of retreat, of defeat. They see you no longer arguing, no longer posting, not reacting, not showing up like before, and they think you have disappeared. What they do not understand is you have not disappeared. You are busy rebuilding yourself. In a world obsessed with constant presence, choosing silence is an intentional act. And the paradox is this. It is in silence that you start to become impossible to ignore. You do not speak often, but when you do, it carries depth. You do not fight for the spotlight, yet people still remember you for something they cannot quite name, a calm that is not forced, a grounded energy that does not need to perform. True presence does not need noise, it needs depth. And depth can only be cultivated in stillness. I learned this not through victory, but through moments of feeling completely alone. When I stopped arguing to be right, when I walked away from conversations just to win, when I chose not to respond to attacks, at first I felt weak, but then I realized I was not silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because I no longer needed to be understood by those who were not listening. That is not surrender. That is self-respect. Your silence is a sacred space where you no longer live to meet expectations, but to reconnect with yourself. And the miracle is this. In your silence, you begin to hear what noise used to drown out. Your intuition, your limits, your real needs. You hear the promises you once forgot to keep with yourself. You begin to remember what is enough and what was just empty applause. When you stop speaking to be acknowledged and begin staying silent to be reshaped, a new kind of energy is formed, not loud, not in need of applause, but with such weight that even those who once underestimated you start to sense that something is changing. Silence does not erase you from the game, it repositions you in a more sustainable way. People may look at your quiet and think you have stopped, but they do not understand that the one who is building has no time to explain. You do not need to announce your comeback. You do not need to clarify what you are doing. You do not need to respond to every opinion. Because once the results show up, every word becomes unnecessary. You no longer need to be everywhere. You just need to be fully present in the right moment with a wholeness no one can imitate. And when that moment comes, you will not need to shout to be recognized. Your presence itself will be the proof. A silence full of gravity, a version of you that can no longer be overlooked. Healing is not a performance. It does not need a spotlight. It does not need applause. It does not need anyone to confirm that you are doing it right. It only needs one thing: a space quiet enough for you to face yourself without defense, without pretending to be strong, without having to hold it together just to seem fine. In a world that treats sharing as healing, I have learned the opposite. Some wounds only close in complete silence, not because you are weak, but because some things are too sacred to turn into content for others to consume. Not everything that hurts must be spoken. Not every moment of recovery needs to be witnessed. True healing begins when you stop asking for permission to heal, when you stop forcing yourself to move on quickly just to avoid making others uncomfortable, when you allow yourself to pause without explanation, without urgency, without needing to look like you are doing better, because sometimes you need to be not okay and still be worthy of respect. I used to think that if I was not strong, I would not be trusted. But then I understood. Real strength does not come from always being okay. It comes from being honest about where you truly are. That is when you stop running from pain. You stop drowning it in work, in words, or in temporary relationships. You stay with it long enough to let it teach you what it came to teach. And here's what I know for sure. Every time you heal in silence, you are building an inner power no one can take away. You do not need validation. You do not need to be understood. You only need one thing to stay loyal to your own journey, even if no one knows what you are going through. That kind of healing is not glamorous. It does not create beautiful quotes. It simply makes you calmer, quieter, gentler with yourself, and more serious about what you allow into your life. When you heal privately, you begin to reset your boundaries from the inside. You do not need to shout, "I am changing." The change will show itself in how you show up. There are relationships you will leave without resentment. There are doors you will close without needing a sound. There are wounds you will no longer talk about, not because you forgot, but because they no longer define you. Not because you erase them, but because they no longer control you. Healing is not forgetting. It is no longer depending on what happened to decide who you are becoming. And when that happens, you no longer need to scream that you made it through. You simply keep walking, steady and quiet. And those who once thought you would never get back up will have to look again, not so you can get revenge, but so they can see that you never needed to beat anyone. You only needed to overcome yourself. That is strength. And it is built not in the gaze of others, but in the silent spaces no one sees. Some relationships are not toxic, but they are draining. Not bad, but empty. Not wrong, but no longer right for who you are becoming. And the hard truth is this: sometimes your growth is not blocked by bad things, but by things that were once good, but you have outgrown them. Not everyone who walked with you will walk with you to the end. And that does not mean you are bad or they are wrong. It just means you are changing. Others may not recognize the new version of you because they keep interacting with your old self. They expect you to be as easygoing as before, as agreeable as before, always the one who knows how to please. But when you start setting boundaries, when you say no to things you once accepted, when you stop reacting the way they are used to, they will get confused. Some may even feel offended. Your growth will make others uncomfortable, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped playing a role they once benefited from. I used to hold on to relationships out of history because we had known each other for a long time, because they were there for me in hard times, because I felt I owed them. But then I realized loyalty cannot be bigger than honesty with yourself. Not everyone who helped you has the right to limit you forever. And not every beautiful memory needs to be extended endlessly. You have the right to change, the right to step out of a role you no longer belong to, the right to withdraw access to your life from people who are no longer truly present in it. That is not cutting ties in anger. It is creating space and awareness. Boundaries are not distance. Boundaries are clarity. They say, I still respect you, but I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my peace to maintain a connection that no longer nourishes me. And when you live with that clarity, something strange begins to happen. You feel less drained, less hurt, less disappointed. Not because others changed, but because you changed how you let people approach you. We do not need to be angry to walk away. We just need to be mature enough to know that some connections were meant for a season, and not every season is meant to last forever. No one teaches us this. We grow up believing that true friends are the ones who stay no matter what. But then you learn a harder truth. A true friend is someone who knows when to walk away, so they do not force you to betray yourself. There are people you love, but cannot keep close. People you are grateful for, but must create distance from. People you do not hate, but cannot keep inviting into your expanding inner world. And that is okay, because your peace should not be the price you pay for someone else's comfort. Once you understand that, you stop fearing being misunderstood. You stop needing to be sympathized with. You only need to keep the road ahead lighter, clearer, and clean, enough for the strongest version of you to walk it without being weighed down. It may sound ironic, but discipline is the only thing that makes you free. Because without discipline, you live by emotion, and emotions are unstable. They change by the day, by the people around you, by your circumstances. One sentence can bring you down. One sleepless morning can make you break a promise to yourself. One moment of weakness can be enough for you to give up the most important thing. And nothing makes you lose direction faster than letting emotions drive your life. Discipline does not come from excitement. It comes from commitment. When you are tired of breaking promises to yourself, when you have seen the price of inconsistency, when you understand that if you do not control yourself, the world will do it for you through expectations, distractions, and cheap temptations that pull you away from your essence. I used to think freedom meant doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. But then I realized that kind of freedom does not last. It leads to distraction. And distraction made me weak. I could not complete anything with depth. I was easily swayed by what others said. I lived on the surface, floating, lacking foundation. That was not freedom. That was conditional drifting. True freedom comes from your ability to control yourself when no one is watching, when no one is forcing you, when no one is pushing you. It comes from looking at something you want and saying, no, not yet. Looking at something you fear and still stepping forward. Looking at an easy opportunity and choosing the path that demands more depth. That is a kind of freedom no one can give you and no one can take away, because it is built in silence through the smallest daily choices. Discipline is quiet. It does not need announcements. It does not need slogans. It only needs you to wake up early today instead of sleeping in. Write 10 more lines when you want to stop. Not reply when you know the other person is not worthy. Not explain yourself when you already know something is no longer right for you. Discipline is living by your own standard, even when no one is there to check. Discipline does not make you perfect. It makes you reliable with yourself first. The kind of person who can assign yourself a task and complete it. The kind of person who can keep a promise, even when no one is watching. The kind of person who does not need motivation because your actions are not tied to your moods. There will be days you do not want to do the right thing. Days when your emotions spiral. Days when every excuse makes sense. On those days, discipline is the friend who never leaves. It does not judge. It does not cheer you on. It simply reminds you, we are not done. And you get up, not because you feel strong, but because you have chosen not to give up. Discipline is the daily reminder that you still have a goal, you still have a mission, and you are not allowed to drift. In a world that tells you to let everything flow, be the one who knows when to say enough, when to rise, when to disconnect from what is comfortable, to rebuild what is meaningful. No one can do that for you. But when you do it, you will understand. Discipline is not punishment. It is the highest form of kindness you can give to your future self. You do not need recognition to have value. You also do not need anyone to understand you in order to keep going. Because the truth is, if you stop Every time there is no applause, you will never go far enough to build anything truly lasting. Applause is not stable. It comes and goes. Today they like you, tomorrow they move on to someone else. If you live by the rhythm of the outside world, you will constantly adjust yourself to fit in instead of growing in the direction that is right. And that will cost you your clarity, your identity, and the sense of direction that only comes from within. Moving forward does not require noise. It only requires one clear reason and one person consistent enough not to abandon it. There are stretches of the road you must walk alone. No spotlight, no applause, no cheering. And that is not a sign of failure. It is a phase of transformation. It is the parts of the journey that no one sees that build the version of you no one expected. Not because you are better than anyone, but because you did not quit when they thought you would. I have learned that achievement makes no sound when it is forming. It is forged in the quiet moments when you resist temptation, in the nameless hours of deep work, in the times you choose discipline over emotion. It is the result of continuing when no one reminds you to keep going, and when the result comes, it needs no announcement. It simply arrives, and it makes people stop and look again. Do not live to impress. Live to keep the promises you made to yourself. No one out there can define who you are. No round of applause will turn you into your best self. Only steady action, repeated every day, quietly, without needing to be seen, can build a person of depth, resilience, and real strength. And do you know what is fascinating? When you stop needing attention, you start creating presence. When you stop trying to be seen, you become impossible to ignore. Inner strength does not come from noise. It comes from the ability to control yourself in silence and to keep going in the dark until the light shows up from within. You do not need to shout to be heard. When you do the work, live with honesty, stay consistent, and do not depend on praise. Your presence will speak for itself. You do not need to declare, "I have changed." Just keep walking as someone who is no longer their old self. You do not need to prove, "I deserve this." Just live as someone who has known that all along. You do not need applause. You do not need a stage. You just need to keep moving day by day, step by step, in the direction that makes you proud. Because in the end, it is not the applause that defines you. It is how you act in the quiet that becomes the strongest declaration of who you are becoming. If you have walked with me this far, through each part, each step, each layer of this journey, then congratulations. Not because you have completed it, but because you were serious enough to look within, brave enough to slow down, and humble enough to change from the root. You do not need anyone to validate that change. The life you live each day in silence will validate it. In a world where noise is celebrated and impulsive emotion is praised, you are choosing a different path, a life of intention. Speaking less, observing more, holding boundaries without apologizing, healing without filming, staying silent not because you are weak, but because you are rebuilding something stronger. You begin to understand. Freedom does not come from doing what you want. It comes from being able to say no to what you no longer need. Self-control is not suppression. It is a form of inner freedom when no one else can dictate your emotions or reactions anymore. And that is the foundation of a life with weight. A life that does not need a stage because it speaks for itself. No one said this journey would be easy, but you do not need easy. You need what is right. No one said you would not get tired, but you do not need comfort. You need growth. No one promised you would never feel alone, but you do not need a crowd. You only need not to betray yourself. And if there is one thing I hope you remember after all of this, it is this. Emotional self-mastery, inner discipline, and intentional response are not just skills, they are honor. Honor to yourself, to the version you know you were born to become. So from today on, stop trying to prove, just keep walking without applause, because the truly dangerous person is the one who no longer needs to win over anyone, only to not lose to themselves.